As always, it's my pleasure to be here with you, and of course, always to be able to be of service to Spirit. And today, I've chosen for my topic, it's March, and all of Spiritualism celebrates. You know, 161 years ago, we heard those first raps in Hydesville, and that ushered in the advent of modern spiritualism. I have a little bit different twist on the story, and I thought I would share that with you. And I'd like to begin by talking about someone by the name of Professor Robert Hare. Professor Hare was at the University of Pennsylvania for some time, and he was a great disbeliever in spiritualism. He mocked it. He did everything he could to destroy it. So he thought, being a scientist, he would develop a tool by which he could prove that communication with the so-called dead was a fraud. This tool became known as Professor Hare's dial. However, although he deliberately set out in the negative, in that he wanted to destroy spiritualism, his experiments repeatedly backfired. His dial took him to meet such people as D.D. Home and Robert Owen and many of the others of the famous pioneers of that day. And he showed them how he could disprove communication with the so-called dead. But like I said, it backfired. He tried and he tried, and his machine failed him. The results were communication with the world of spirit was a fact. And this fact, demonstrated by his own scientific tool, convicted his heart to spiritualism, and he served spiritualism the rest of his life. But the reason I mentioned him this morning is because, were it not for him, perhaps maybe the message would not have been given that was received by James Lawrence from Ohio, another well-known spiritualist. He sat with Professor Hare, and I would like to read to you what he received from the spirit side of life, and I quote, "Some acknowledgement should be given to the most glorious change, the advent of which has never yet been celebrated as a matter of public rejoicing by the assembled multitudes of spiritualists. Shall all the minor circumstances of earth have their dates and their days of commemoration, and the glorious new and holy dispensation be neglected? It is time such tribute should be paid to those who have thus presented to the world a means of emancipation from error, such as will meet the requirements of an all-day of universal jubilee to be observed through all times," unquote. March is the month throughout the United States where people are discussing, seeking, learning the truths of that glorious beginning. And then, you know, what good is a message if we don't use it? And so James Lawrence decided that he must do something about it. And this is another quote. "Whereas spiritualism has become a power in the land and may be deemed the great growing religious idea of the country, and it is well to revert back to the time of small beginnings and hold in remembrance our first pioneers in the spiritualist movement. Therefore resolve that this convention recommend to all state conventions and local societies to make the time of the appearance of the Hydesville wrappings an anniversary day, that service to be conducted in each locality as may be deemed practical." Yes, friends, that was 139 years ago. We as spiritualists took the time to set aside and revert back to the small beginnings and to the mediums of the advent of modern spiritualism, Margaretta and Catherine Fox, and to the obscure hamlet of Hydesville in New York. But we must stop. We've missed a major point. While we give praise and glory to these two young children, and remember they were just that, children, aged 11 and 9, their names cannot be mentioned without the name of the murdered peddler, Charles B. Rosner. It was he who created the vibrations to create the communication between the two worlds. And it was the girls who received that communication. In this regard, there is another famous pioneer of ours who spoke out, and he gave us some serious words to think about. And I love him. His name was Ben Hayden. And in 1910, he said, and I quote, "One of the three names should never be mentioned without the others. What a debt we owe to this poor itinerant peddler." Then he went on to say, "I would wrest his name from obscurity into which it has been permitted to lapse, and place it among those of the greatest benefactors of our human race. And like the name of Abu Ben Adam of old, I would have Charles B. Rosner lead all the rest. It was Rosner who brought life and immortality to light in an age when it was most seriously needed." And his important words, which I really love and really wish that we would take up: "Charles B. Rosner's name should be inscribed in golden letters upon the title page of every book and pamphlet issued from the Spiritualist press." And I think that is the truth. For without Rosner, perhaps someone else may have come through to present us with a new advent. For perhaps it all was chosen and set to be, and Charles B. Rosner brought us those words of truth. But you know, as we go through the history of spiritualism, and as we talk about these wonderful things, we often forget important things. And a very important person whose name is usually not mentioned, if you recall that the noises had become so prominent in the house, it was thought best to separate the two girls, and perhaps they would cease. And so Margaretta went to Rochester with her eldest sister of 34 years, Leah Fish. Mrs. Fox, with her husband and children, her other child moved down the road just 2 miles to her son's home, David, and that is Parker Road, and it intersects with Hydesville Road, right downtown. It didn't work. The raps continued. They were in Hydesville, and they were in Rochester. And finally, Mrs. Fox and Catherine moved to Rochester to be with Margaretta, who had become very despondent about leaving her dear beloved sister behind. So all that happened in Hydesville, and it took place in a time when it was needed, and people, just like today, kind of looked back and ignored it and thought maybe it would go away. And you know, it might have been a fad of that time, and it might have passed into obscurity. It might have died its natural death. But instead, because of Leah Fox Fish, who brought it out to Hydesville, who worked with those important people of the day to get Corinthian Hall and to bring the message to the public. And that was the beginning of spiritualism on the move.